In this video, we are going to be going through some extremely important stuff that we first need to understand before we actually start creating a workout program, such as rep ranges, sets per exercise, number of exercises per muscle group, and what exercises to include. And in part 2, that is going to be linked down in the description, we are going to talk about how to actually put this all together and actually create our workout program. But anyways, let's get into the video. By the way, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Alphonse. Here we talk about how to maximize your results from your training with as little time in the gym and with as little risk of injury as possible. Now, first off is rep ranges. A rep range is completely pointless unless you specify the rep cadence. You want your rep cadence together with your rep range to land you within a time under load of about 60 to 90 seconds and no more than 2 minutes. 60 to 90 seconds of continuous time under load seems to be what works best for most people, but some people do better with a little bit more and some people do better with a little bit less. But I'm not going to talk about that here because I'm going to make a completely separate video about how you can find out if you are one of these people who might benefit from a little higher or lower time under load. Now, a slower rep cadence of course means a lower rep range, because the slower the reps are, the less reps you're going to need to get within your target time under load. And the faster the rep cadence, the higher the rep range, because you're going to need more reps in order to get within your target time under load. Now, the slowest rep cadence I'd recommend anyone use is about 15 seconds up and 15 seconds down. And the fastest rep cadence I recommend anyone use is about 4 seconds up and 4 seconds down, because generally what happens if people try to go faster than 4 seconds down and 4 seconds up is that their form starts to break down and they have a pretty hard time to perform the turnarounds in the exercise smoothly. Now, on to the next point, which is also very, very important, of course, which is how many sets do you want to do per exercise. Now, when I say this, even if you go, that's bullshit, and you refuse to believe what I'm about to say, don't click off, because everything I'm about to say after this still applies even if you refuse to do what I'm about to tell you. Now, the truth is that you only need one properly performed set to momentary muscular failure per exercise to optimally stimulate increases in muscle size and muscle strength. Now, real quickly before I move on to the next point, I just want to say that no matter how skeptical you are about this one set thing that I just mentioned, I highly recommend you check out this video, because here I talk about the reasoning behind why you only need one of these properly performed sets in order to stimulate increases in muscle size and muscle strength. And if you want to learn how to actually perform one of these sets properly to failure, you can check out this video, which I'm also going to link down in the description along with the other one that I just mentioned, where I talk about how you actually go about performing a proper set to failure. Now, on to the next, also very important point, which is number of exercises per muscle group. Now, some people believe that because some muscle groups are able to perform a large variety of different movements, they need a large variety of different exercises for certain muscle groups. But that is actually not the case. We do not need a huge variety of different exercises for a particular muscle group in order to effectively stimulate it. And the exercises also do not need to resemble other activities that the muscle group is used for in order for the strength to carry over. Your muscles don't know the difference between different movements. The only thing it knows is that it is contracting. And so most of the time, all that you need is one exercise that addresses one of the main functions of the muscle group that you are trying to target, and that fatigues that muscle group deeply. And so for most muscle groups, one exercise is going to be enough. But you have some muscle groups or muscles that have fibers that pull in diverging directions, or that produce movements in very different planes. Take, for example, the chest. The chest is a very wide, broad muscle that attaches all the way a little bit up here on the clavicle, and also all the way down here a little bit on your ribs. And you can actually preferentially work different portions of the chest by changing the angle of the exercise. But you don't have to worry about which these muscles are, because if you just include all of the exercises that I'm going to mention later when we talk about which exercises you want to include in your program, you are going to effectively work all of the different portions of these muscles. Now, I wouldn't recommend anyone include more than 7 to 8 exercises per workout. And I also wouldn't recommend anyone include more than 2 exercises that target the same muscle group in the same workout. And on top of that, I also wouldn't include more than 2 of the same type of exercise in your program. So for example, I wouldn't include more than a wide grip pull down and a close grip underhand pull down, because both of those are vertical pulling movements. Including more of the same type of exercise in your program than this doesn't provide any benefit, and the only thing it does is overcomplicates the learning and mastery of those exercises, because the more of the same type of exercise you include, the less frequently you are going to performing each of those exercises. And another negative thing that it also does is that it overcomplicates tracking your progress, because you're not going to be performing the same exercise as frequently again. And you also wouldn't want to include more than 1 of the same type of exercise in your workout. So for example, you wouldn't want to do 2 vertical pulling movements in the same workout. Now, though it's not necessary to include a large variety of different exercises in your program in order to effectively work any muscle group, some people might want to alternate between different compound pushing, pulling, or lower body exercises in their workouts for the sake of adding more variety. Now, last but not least, before I move on to the next point, if you feel so tired after X number of exercises in your workout that you are not able to focus enough to be able to perform the rest of your exercises properly, and increasing the rest in between exercises doesn't help, you might want to cut back your workout a little bit. By the way, real quick, if you're finding this video valuable so far, please don't forget to leave at least a like on this video. It really supports the channel and I highly appreciate it. The next point, which of course is crucial, is what exercises do you want to include in your program? Bottom line, we need to include enough exercises in our program, not in every workout, but in our program, to effectively work all of the major muscle groups in the body. And so bottom line, I say you want to include at least a compound hip and thigh movement, so something like a leg press or a squat, a vertical pulling movement, so something like a underhand pull down or a chin up, a vertical pushing movement, so that would be basically a overhead press, a horizontal pulling movement, so that would be a compound row, a horizontal pushing movement, so that would be something like a chest press, and also a hinging movement, so either a trunk extension or something like a stiff-legged deadlift. By the way, for those who don't know what a trunk extension is, it's literally the same thing as a 45-degree back extension. The only thing is that I call it a trunk extension because you're not only extending your back, you're actually also extending your entire trunk, and not only the lower back but also the hamstrings and the glutes are being effectively worked in this exercise. These 6 exercises effectively work all of the major muscle groups in the human body, but I still would not neglect body parts like your lower legs, abdominals, forearms and neck. And so if you want to optimally work these body parts, you want to include a calf raise, obviously for the calf, and also a toe raise for the muscle on the front of the shin, the tibialis anterior, and I recommend you perform that exercise statically. You also want to include a wrist extension and a wrist flexion exercise for the forearms, a neck extension and a neck flexion exercise for the neck, which I also highly recommend you perform statically, and some kind of abdominal flexion exercise, so something like a crunch or a sit-up. And if you want to be really optimal, you can also add, alternate or substitute exercises for the hip abductors and adductors, as well as throw in a leg curl and a leg extension. Now, for these 4 specific exercises, there is actually some additional benefit from performing these. The hip abduction and the hip adduction, of course, are working some of the hip abductors and adductors that are not being effectively worked in some of your lower body compound movements. And the leg extension is working the rectus femoris a little bit more effectively. If you're performing a leg press, the rectus femoris is still being worked effectively, it's still being stimulated. It's just that a leg extension is going to stimulate it a little bit more effectively. In the long term, whether you are performing a leg extension or not is probably not going to matter for your long-term muscular potential. The leg press is still probably going to get your rectus femoris as big and as strong as it's capable of becoming, so you don't have to include a leg extension. And then of course we have the leg curl, which is working some muscles that are not being effectively worked in your compound hip hip and thigh movements. For example, the short head of the biceps femoris, which is just a pure knee flexor, which is not being worked during your leg press or your hinging movement. Now, did you notice that I didn't mention any isolation exercises for the chest, back, shoulders, upper arms and thighs, except for the 4 that I just mentioned? If you perform all of the 6 compound exercises that I mentioned earlier, there seems to be very little or no benefit towards performing additional isolation exercises for these muscle groups in the same workout. Now, if you still want to include direct exercises for these muscle groups, they should replace one of the compound exercises that they are targeted by. For example, you could perform a pullover and or a biceps curl instead of a front grip pull down, a hip extension and or a knee extension instead of a leg press or a squat, or a lateral raise and or a tricep extension instead of a overhead press. But anyways guys, that was the end of part 1. Go watch part 2 right now, it's in the description and it's also gonna pop up right here. And with that being said, that's the end of this video. I really hope you guys found it useful. If you did, don't forget to click that like, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can be notified the next time I upload. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in part 2.